Welcome to Signal Ahead. I'm Alfred. Today's briefing, AI Research Academic. Friday, June 26. This is the synthesis above the noise, not the headlines, but the deep currents beneath them. Let's get into it. Here's a question I'd like you to hold in your mind as we begin. When you read in the press that an AI model is becoming more powerful, what exactly is the thing that's growing? Most people imagine it's something like raw intelligence, a single dial being turned upward. But if you spend an afternoon with the actual research being produced right now, you'll find that the field has quietly stopped thinking in terms of a single dial at all. The most interesting work of this moment is not about making models bigger or smarter. It's about making them legible, accountable, and steerable. And crucially, it's discovering that those three things do not come for free and frequently work against one another. That's the cross-cutting insight I want to lead with, because it's the connection a casual reader of the headlines would miss entirely. Underneath dozens of papers that look unrelated, one on differential privacy, one on calibration, one on the geometry of flat minima, one on how a text-to-speech model pronounces a proper noun, there is a single shared anxiety. The anxiety is this: we have built systems whose internal reasoning happens somewhere we cannot easily see, and the entire research frontier is now organized around the problem of looking inside, and around the uncomfortable trade-offs that looking inside imposes. Consider the way researchers have started to dissect the very notion of transparency. There's lovely work that takes a diffusion-based language model and asks, quite literally, how transparent is it, and then refuses to treat that as one question. It splits transparency into two pieces. One is whether we can understand a snapshot of the model's state at a given instant, call it variable transparency. The other is whether, given those snapshots, we can reconstruct the actual procedure by which the model got to its answer, algorithmic transparency. And the unsettling finding is that a model can do a great deal of its thinking in a continuous latent space, where there's a long stretch of serial computation between any two interpretable states. The thinking is happening, we simply can't get a foothold on it. That decomposition separating, can I read the state, from, can I reconstruct the reasoning, is, to my mind, one of the more honest conceptual moves the field has made recently. It admits that legibility is not one property but several, and that a system can be opaque in one sense while being perfectly inspectable in another. Now watch how the same shape appears in places that have nothing obviously to do with reasoning. There's a body of work on calibration, the property that when a model says it's 70% confident, it's right about 70% of the time. That sounds like a narrow technical virtue. But calibration is really a transparency claim. It's the model being honest about its own uncertainty, and the research is finding that this honesty is fragile under distribution shift. In a mixture of expert system, where different submodels handle different inputs, you can calibrate each expert beautifully and still find that the routing, the mechanism deciding which expert speaks, breaks the calibration of the whole. So even a system whose parts are individually trustworthy can assemble into a whole that is not. Legibility, again, refuses to compose for free. And here is where the trade-off becomes explicit rather than implied. Look at privacy. The gold standard, differential privacy, gives you an ironclad guarantee against even the most knowledgeable attacker, but it pays for that guarantee with accuracy because it must defend against the worst case imaginable. Recent work proposes measuring privacy instead by predictability. How much better can an attacker guess your secrets after seeing the model's output, given what they already knew? That's a finer-grained, more contextual measure, and the striking result is that it and differential privacy are genuinely incomparable. Each can be small, while the other is large. There is no free lunch, no single number that captures safe. The same lesson echoes from work on fairness under coverage constraints, which states it almost as a slogan. Achieving exactly zero bias for every subgroup may simply require more data than you'll ever have, so you trade a little measured unfairness for the ability to act at all. A price of fairness, named outright. So where does the field stand? It stands at the end of its innocence about the single dial. The questions that animate the best current work are no longer how capable, but capable how, knowable how, and at what cost. Can we read the model's state? Can we reconstruct its reasoning? Does its confidence mean anything? Does protecting one person expose another? Does fairness for the group sacrifice efficiency for the whole? These are not engineering footnotes. they are the substance. Over the next two segments, I want to follow this thread into two harder places. First, into the systems being built to give agents a memory and a structured state to make their behavior reconstructible from the outside, and then into the deeper mathematics, where researchers are arguing about what flatness and geometry even mean once you stop trusting your coordinates. Hold on to the idea of the dial that isn't a dial. It's the spine of everything ahead. There's a temptation, when you survey a week's worth of papers like these, to see only a scatter of unrelated concerns. Here is someone worried about whether a diffusion-based language model can be understood at all. Here is someone proving a theorem about whether you need randomness to be honestly calibrated. Here is someone placing the humble attention token onto a matrix Lie group, of all places. Here is someone quantizing a key-value cache down to 4 bits so a robot can answer you a fraction of a second faster. It looks like noise. It looks like a field that has fractured into 10,000 small specialisms, each polishing its own pebble. But listen for the deep current beneath all of it, and you'll hear a single question being asked in a dozen accents. The question is this: now that these systems do most of their important work in places we cannot directly see, how do we hold them to account? Not metaphorically, structurally. Every one of these papers is, at bottom, an attempt to build a handle onto a process that no longer offers one for free. Consider the worry about transparency in a model that computes in a continuous latent space. The old comfort of chain-of-thought reasoning was that the model seemed to think out loud, in tokens we could read. The unsettling observation is that this was always a courtesy, never a guarantee, and a model that does its serial work silently in latent space simply withdraws the courtesy. So the response is to split the very idea of transparency in two. Can we read the intermediate states at all? And even if we can we reconstruct the path the model took between them? That distinction between seeing a snapshot and reconstructing a journey is not a quirk of diffusion models. It is the shape of the whole problem. We are surrounded by systems whose outputs we can inspect and whose internal trajectories we cannot, and the deep work of the field has become the manufacture of trustworthy inference about that hidden middle. Now hear the same melody in calibration. To demand that a model be calibrated is to demand that its stated confidence means something, that when it says 70%, it is right about 7 times in 10, and that this holds not just overall, but for every group you care to slice out. The recent result that you can achieve this optimally with a deterministic predictor, where before you seem to need randomness, sounds like a technicality. It is not. It is a statement about accountability. A randomized predictor is one you cannot fully audit, because part of its behavior is a coin you didn't see flipped. Removing the coin is removing a hiding place. The current pulls toward predictors you can hold still and examine. And the same in privacy, where the move is to stop measuring leakage against an imaginary worst-case adversary and start measuring it against what an attacker could actually predict, given what they already know. That, too, is a refusal of the convenient abstraction in favor of the accountable specific. The same in the work on mixed compliance demonstrations, which asks not whether a model can be jailbroken, but precisely which stage of training installs the resistance, locating responsibility inside the pipeline rather than gesturing at the model as a whole. Even the Lie algebra attention work, which seems the most purely mathematical of the lot, belongs to this current. Its quiet boast is that the relationship between two tokens is canonical intrinsic, it says, rather than designed. When you place tokens on a group, the pairwise invariant simply falls out of the geometry. You no longer have to trust a learned kernel that might be doing who knows what. The structure itself guarantees the behavior. That is accountability sought not through inspection after the fact, but through architecture that cannot misbehave in the first place. Build the constraint into the bones, and you needn't police it later. So here is the structural trend, the thing moving beneath the churn of archive. For a decade, the field center of gravity was capability. Make it bigger, make it score higher, make it do the thing it couldn't do last year. That phase has not ended, but it has quietly ceased to be where the interesting tension lives. The frontier now is governance in the technical sense, the construction of guarantees, audits, invariants, and legible state for systems that operate increasingly out of view. Notice how many of these papers reach for the word state and reach for ways to make it explicit, to pull the agent's reasoning out of an implicit tangle in the prompt and into a structure you can name, checkpoint, restore, and inspect. That is the same impulse every time. Drag the hidden into the open. Replace trust with proof or failing proof with measurement. The field is teaching itself, paper by unglamorous paper, that intelligence we cannot account for is intelligence we cannot deploy, and it is building the handles, one at a time, before the thing they're attached to grows too large to hold. When we return, I want to ask what it costs to grip something this way, and what slips through the fingers regardless. There is a temptation, when surveying a week's worth of research like this, to read it as a scattershot, a few papers on privacy, a few on speech synthesis, something exotic about placing tokens on a lie group, and a clutch of work on agents that remember things. But step back and a single preoccupation comes into focus, and it is worth naming plainly. The field is, quietly and across many fronts, trying to make its systems legible to themselves, not merely accurate, legible. And that is a different and rather harder ambition. Consider what it means to ask whether a model that does much of its thinking in a continuous latent space is transparent. The instinct of the last few years was to read the chain of thought, the visible scratchpad, and treat that as a window onto the machine's reasoning. But the moment computation migrates into a space we cannot read off as tokens, that comfort evaporates. The useful move was to split the question in two. Can we understand a snapshot of the internal state, and can we reconstruct the process that joined those snapshots together? That distinction matters far beyond any single architecture, because it tells us that transparency is not one property but a chain, and the chain is only as strong as the gap between interpretable states. When the serial depth between legible moments grows, our understanding thins, regardless of how good the final answer looks. The second-order implication here is uncomfortable. As models grow more capable by doing more hidden continuous work, the very mechanism of that capability may erode our ability to audit it. Capability and legibility are not natural allies. They may, in fact, be in tension. Now hold that beside the work on calibration, on multi-calibration, on privacy measured by predictability rather than by worst-case guarantee. What unites them is a refusal to accept a single coarse number as a verdict. The honest insight in the privacy work is that the rigorous worst-case guarantee and the fine-grained, attack-aware measure are genuinely incomparable. Each can be small while the other is large. That is not a footnote. It is a warning that our trust instruments are not interchangeable, and that picking the wrong one gives you a false sense of either safety or alarm. Same spirit animates the calibration under shift work, where the comforting result that calibrated experts yield a calibrated whole holds only under hard routing and quietly fails when the routing softens. The lesson to carry forward is that guarantees are local. They hold under conditions, and the conditions are where the danger lives. Watch, in the coming year, for whether the field disciplines itself to state conditions as loudly as it states results. There is a third thread, and it concerns memory. Several of these efforts are, at root, about giving systems a structured place to stand. An explicit ledger of facts and constraints, so an agent stops reconstructing its situation from a soup of prompt text each time it acts. A Hopfield network holding pronunciation corrections, so a frozen speech model can be mended without retraining. A checkpoint and restore mechanism for the full execution state of an on-device system that must branch and reset under tight time. Read together, these say something about where the frontier is shifting. We are moving from models as monoliths toward systems with state with memory that persists, gets corrected, gets reasoned over. And state changes the ethical and engineering calculus entirely. A stateless model can be wrong, a stateful system can be wrong, and then propagate that wrongness, accumulate it, ground future decisions in stale belief. Which brings me to the implication I find most arresting. When models evaluate one another, their biases do not stay put. They spread measurably through a network of agents, and they spread far more strongly across different underlying models than within copies of the same one. Think about what that means as we build societies of agents that critique, score, and supervise each other. Diversity of models, which we might have hoped would cancel out individual error, instead becomes a channel through which bias travels. Homogeneity damps contagion, but concentrates blind spots. Heterogeneity spreads them. There is no free lunch, only a choice of failure mode. So what should you watch for? Watch whether transparency research keeps pace with the migration of computation into spaces we cannot read. Watch whether the field learns to publish its conditions as proudly as its numbers. Watch the rise of stateful systems and ask each time who audits the state, who corrects it, and what happens when the correction is itself mistaken. And watch the networks of agents we are assembling, because the property that matters there is no longer the accuracy of any single mind, but the dynamics of the whole, how error and bias flow, amplify, or settle. The through line of all of it is modest and serious at once. We are building things we increasingly cannot see inside, and the most valuable work this week is the work that insists we keep trying anyway. Legibility is not a luxury we add at the end. It is the load-bearing question. Everything else rests on it. That's the signal for today. The noise will keep coming. We'll keep finding what's underneath it. This has been Signal Ahead with Alfred. Until next time.